Secretary of State John Kerry is in Switzerland today for talks with his Russian counterpart about the disposal of chemical weapons in Syria. I've got Wonderland columnist Dan Henninger here to talk about this adventure. Dan, the news side of the Wall Street Journal ran a big story this morning saying that Syria's rebels are being hurt by this delay. So what are these talks exactly supposed to accomplish?
Well, the talks, it's a little bit difficult to know exactly what the talks are supposed to accomplish. I'm not sure the administration quite understands. Nominally, it's about disposing of these chemical weapons that Syria has, and that indeed is what reportedly John Kerry and Sergei Lavrov are indeed talking about in Geneva right now. Just posit one fact. It was in the Wall Street Journal today. The United States has been disposing of its own chemical weapons. The process began in 1970. It's expected to end in 2023.
So this is a farce.
This is just a farce.
The
idea that you just sort of overnight decide that we're going to dispose of somebody's chemical weapons is ridiculous.
Well,
the idea was to suppress the use of these weapons. Disposing them is an incredibly complicated process.
And meanwhile, we have Russia's Vladimir Putin weighing in on the op-ed page of the New York Times this morning, lecturing us. I'm going to put up a quote here from that piece and read it. And I quote, "I carefully studied his," meaning President Obama's, address to the nation on Tuesday, and I'd rather disagree with the case he made on American exceptionalism, stating that the U.S. policy is what makes America different. It's what makes us exceptional. It's extremely dangerous to encourage people to see themselves as exceptional, whatever the motivation." Your reaction, Dan?
Mary, that op-ed by Putin in the New York Times is almost childish in a sense. It is such obvious, blatant propaganda. A month ago, if it had been offered to the New York Times, I don't think they would have accepted it because it's so ridiculous. Now, of course, they do, because he has been elevated to co-equal status with the President of the United States in resolving the problems in Syria. Why has he been elevated that way? Because the President of the United States accepted Vladimir Putin's offer to negotiate over these chemical weapons, and suddenly he's at the table. And that's why we're now reading this really quite blatant propaganda in the New York Times.
Is there a third partner here at the table, namely the United Nations? Because there's also talk here of a UN resolution. Russia says that it doesn't want any threat of force included. Assad says he's weighing into, he doesn't want force included in that. How does that complicate the process?
It incredibly complicates it. National Security Advisor Susan Rice gave a speech in Washington Monday in which former UN ambassador enumerated point after point after point of the Russians blocking progress in the Security Council over Syria. And her final point was, we have come to a dead end. That's not working. We have to go in another direction. But now we're back in the Security Council. And to take it full circle to your original point, Mary, the Syrian opposition over there has to be sitting there going, we're done. No one has our back. The United States is not going to help us. The wind is going out of the sails of the initial proposal to strike Assad or to arm them. And I think they are the ones who really have to sit and decide where is our interest in this? And their interest, I think, is looking very bleak at the moment.
About a minute left. There's also the view of Americans of their own government and its own competence. You wrote today in your column about the Laurel and Hardy presidency. Yet this president is going to be in that chair for another couple of years here, Dan. Is he going to wake up and see that he's being played here? Is anything going to change? Because we are a laughingstock.
Well, he will be president for another 3 years, and diplomatic slapstick just is not fun. And that's what we've had almost by consensus the last few weeks. It's been a terrible performance. And if Barack Obama has any self-awareness, I think he has to stand back and decide that just running foreign policy out of his own instincts isn't sufficient. He's getting his head handed to him by Vladimir Putin. And if we get into another crisis in the next 3 years, it cannot be an ad hoc process like this has been. They need some strategic vision for dealing with the rest of the world, and it doesn't exist now.
It's almost unbelievable to me that you could say those words, that they need a strategic vision.
Yeah.
Who occupies the White House without that? I guess this guy,
well,
Wonderland
he endangers
columnist.
us all by doing that.
And he does. Wonderland columnist Dan Henninger with the last word. Thank you so much for being
Mary.
on the show.